Yes, we will go ahead and get started. My name is Catherine Ridley. I am the Vice President for Education and Communications at 100 Miles. We're a coastal conservation organization that works to preserve and protect Georgia's 100-mile coast through education, advocacy, and citizen engagement, which is what tonight is all about. We're so excited to have so many of you joining us from all over the state tonight. We have a great crowd signed up, and of course, welcome to those of you who are tuning in on our YouTube channel a little bit later. We're excited that you're here for this topic. There's been a lot of interest, and it's really a great time for all of us who care about Georgia's wildlife to come together and think about the different ways that we can make a difference. There's so many different wildlife species, including humans, that really would benefit from changes to artificial lighting. But tonight we're going to focus on a couple of different species or a couple of different animals that are near and dear to our hearts. And that's migratory birds across our state. And also here on our coast, Georgia's nesting sea turtles and hatching sea turtles that are going to be coming to our barrier island beaches soon. So we're very fortunate to have both Mark Dodd, who is here with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife Resources Division. He's the senior biologist there and the coordinator of our sea turtle program here in Georgia, as well as Adam Betuel, who is the director of conservation at Georgia Audubon. Both of these guys are wonderful speakers and have really kindly agreed to donate their time tonight, but they're great friends to Georgia wildlife and do a lot for our state. So we're really grateful for them being here tonight, but also for all that they do throughout the year to help us protect our wildlife and think about really important issues like artificial lighting. So I think with that in mind, we're going to just jump right into the main event. And we're going to start with Adam, his focus on migratory birds, and then we're going to switch to Mark. And so you'll get to hear presentations from both of these speakers tonight. I'm going to go ahead and encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A box as you have them, as Adam or Mark say something that just sparks your interest. And we will get to those at the end as much as possible. So with that in mind, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Adam. Adam, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone. And Catherine, you nailed the last name, so good job. But yeah, my name is Adam Betuel. I'm the Conservation Director for Georgia Audubon, and I'm thrilled to be talking with you all tonight about birds and light and some of the ways that we are working on this issue at Georgia Audubon and things you can do at home to help our birds. So I wanted to start by letting you know who we are at Georgia Audubon, because we are an old organization and also a brand new one at the same time. We used to be the Atlanta Bird Club all the way back in the 20s, but most of you maybe have heard of us as the Atlanta Audubon Society. Last year during the pandemic, perfect timing, we made the decision to expand to a statewide organization. So we are part of the National Audubon Society Network, which you maybe have heard of. They produce that beautiful magazine you've seen and are a national science and advocacy group. But we are independent. We have our own board, staff, membership dues, strategic plan, all that good stuff. And so we are working to build places where birds and people thrive across the state, and are hoping to empower and add capacity to the other volunteer chapters that are across the state, whether it be Savannah, Brunswick, Macon, Columbus, or elsewhere. So we're kind of the non-profit focused on birds here across our state. And so why do birds matter? I assume most of you are hopefully preaching to the choir here, but why do birds matter? And there's so many reasons. They inspire us. They're beautiful. You know, they have the ability to fly, which is always great. You know, you see that painted bunting on the far left there, a bird that breeds on our Georgia coast. It's hard not to be blown away by that beautiful bird. They provide a number of eco services. And so by that, I mean, they pollinate, they spread seeds. You know, this cedar waxwing in the middle will eat those berries, fly elsewhere, pass the seeds along and help our vegetation spread. You know, they eat pest insects on our crops. They do all sorts of important things from an ecological standpoint. And birds mean business. There are over 40 million bird watchers across our country that contribute tens of billions of dollars to our economy. People will drive down to Georgia or to Florida to look at things like that amazing roseate spoonbill on the left. So birds matter for a multitude of reasons, in addition to the fact that they just do. But unfortunately, birds are in trouble. And that's kind of why I have a job, and many other ornithologists have a job. And there was a big report that came out late in 2019 that showed that in the past 50 years, we have lost around 3 billion birds in our country. Now, it doesn't mean that during that time, 3 billion birds have died, because more than that has died during that time with the normal ups and downs of an annual cycle and old age and young birds not making it. But the collective kind of avian biomass has decreased by 3 billion. So at 50 years ago, it was thought that there were around 10 billion birds at any given time in North America. And now that's down to 7 billion. So that's the loss of about 1 in 4 birds during that time period, which is pretty shocking. And it's actually accelerated. In the last 12 years, we've seen an even faster decline of our birds. And many species and many groupings of birds have felt these effects, but one example just to illustrate the issue is grassland birds, where there's been more than a 50% loss of grassland species in this time, including something that many of you probably grew up or still hear, today, if you live out in maybe a slightly more rural area, the eastern meadowlark with their beautiful kind of melodic song. It's becoming less and less common. So birds are in trouble. And why are they declining? The paper that came up with that 3 billion loss did not specifically outline the losses to birds, but we know what many of them are. The top threat to birds is habitat loss, whether it be exotic invasive plant species, clear cutting, agriculture. Here you're looking at a photo of some rainforest with a canola field to the right. We use canola, we need that stuff, but there are some pressures on birds because of habitat loss and fragmentation. Outdoor cats is the second leading cause of bird death in our country. Many, tens of millions, maybe even 100 million unowned feral cats, and then domestic cats have outdoor access. But we actually came here today, or I came to talk about the third leading cause, which might be somewhat surprising, or at least the scale of the issue, and that's bird building collisions. The numbers, there's a wide variance there, but on the low end, it's estimated that 1 million birds a day, if you were to break it out over a daily basis, are dying in the US from running in the buildings. And the upper end is up near 1 billion birds a year. So it's a huge toll on our avian life. And just to kind of put that in comparison to some other sources of mortality that you might be aware of, it dwarfs what we see with wind turbines, nothing close to it with cell towers or power lines, electrocutions. It really is up there with some of the larger unfortunate causes like habitat loss in cats. Of course, climate change, which isn't quite as well quantified at this point. So why on earth are birds running in the buildings, and what does it have to do with reducing your lighting? Well, the first thing is a lot of birds migrate at night, and now is a perfect time to be talking about this because we are right on the beginning stages of just tons of birds migrating up through Georgia. Some are going to come through the Caribbean, up through Peninsular Florida and through our state. Some are going to, they're a little water phobic. They're going to hang in Mexico and loop around and maybe cut and hit the northwest corner of Georgia. Many of them are going to do this amazing nonstop journey over the Gulf of Mexico. And they do that at night. And they use the setting sun and stars and many other navigational tools to make it safely to the US. And this is a really cool graphic showing you how we can pick up bird migration with weather radar. So the greens and yellows moving west to east are your typical, thunderstorms. And the white dots are radar stations. And those pulses of light blue are actually birds migrating over. So this ability to use NexRad radar, NexRad technology to look at bird migration and bird movements has really revolutionized what we know about migration and also what we know about bird loss. And again, even though we've lost a lot of birds, there's still a lot there. And this time of year, there are 3.5 billion birds that enter our country from the south each spring. And again, this has already started and it's going to be peaking here in Georgia in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Here's another cool graphic where those radar stations are green. The red line is sunset. The orange arrows are the direction of the movement, and the blue is birds moving into that area. So you can see as soon as that sun sets, we get a few hours past it, birds really start picking up that migration northbound. And again, the same thing south in the fall. But the problem is, as these birds migrate, they have been shown to be confused and even attracted by our nocturnal lighting, by our ambient light pollution. So a bird might be flying over the Gulf of Mexico, they come over peninsular Florida, and all of a sudden they see Atlanta or Savannah on the coast, and they are sucked into these illuminated areas. And when that happens, they can collide with a structure. They can become exhausted from swirling when they're entrapped in a light source, or more frequently, they land somewhere they shouldn't, right in the middle of town where there isn't a lot of greenery. And when that happens, they have issues with glass. And so today we're not talking much about glass, but lighting and glass go hand in hand with this problem. Birds don't understand reflections. They see that as more trees or more forest, and they often run into the facade of the building, causing a problem. Even transparent glass, if it's parallel or a glass corner, for example, a bird just doesn't understand it as a barrier and thinks it can go right through, often with really negative consequences. So lighting and glass really go hand in hand, but I'm going to mainly focus on the lighting from here on out, but I wanted to mention that because the glass is a major, major issue in relation to collisions. So hopefully this video comes through. This is from the 9/11 tribute in lights in New York City. There are powerful beams of light that go up on September 11th to remember those that were lost and the buildings that used to stand there. And unfortunately for the birds, this happens to be right in fall migration. And so, sorry, that's a bit loud, I shouldn't be a video warning. As these birds are migrating over New York, they become trapped in this beam of light. And so what you're looking at are not insects or moths or beetles, but those are birds, those white specks that you're seeing. And New York City Audubon and Audubon New York and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and many partners have worked with the operators of these lights. And they will cut the lights if 1,000 birds can be counted at one time. Cut the lights, the birds pretty quickly disperse, they can turn them back on. So it's a very important symbol for our country, but it does have some consequences on birds, and luckily there has been a balance to address it. Now, this type of light is extreme. We don't have these beams of lights coming out of, Metter, Georgia. This is just an extreme case, but it does show how birds struggle with light. And to really put some numbers to it, at that site, when the lights were off, there were 500 birds within a square half kilometer of that location. 20 minutes later, after the lights had been turned on, there were nearly 16,000 birds. So again, this is an extreme case, but it really shows the pull that lighting has on our migratory birds as they pass over our cities and even other less concentrated urban and suburban and even rural locations. And we're just putting up more and more and more light. This is the Houston metropolitan area. It's now larger than the state of New Jersey. And again, if you think about all these birds that are about to fly over the Gulf of Mexico, our hummingbirds and our warblers and the beautiful songbirds you might think of, this is one of the first places that they're going to run into, literally, unfortunately, at times, as they make it across the Gulf. And it's not just these big showy lights or big high-rise buildings. Even relatively boring buildings like this in Galveston can be really problematic. One night, about 4 years ago now, 500 plus birds died at that single building. It was kind of a perfect confluence of bad stuff, fog and low clouds. The birds had really been pushed over the Gulf, and the spotlighting effect on this building was the real issue and made it really glow. And I apologize for all the dead bird photos. I try not to put too many in these talks, but it's the reality of what happened here and what happens across our country during this time of year. Now, looking at Georgia specifically, this is a cool study that came out a couple years ago where it looked at the amount of light some of our major urban centers produce and the likelihood that that light is going to have an impact on birds. So it's not necessarily these cities are the worst, they're going to have the collisions, but it's likely because you're looking at variables of lighting and how they might impact the birds. And you see that Atlanta, our biggest city, is the 9th most dangerous city in the spring, again right now, and 4th in the fall. And you might ask why the difference. It has to do with the way that birds migrate, kind of an oval shape that many take. So in the fall especially, we have a lot of birds passing through Georgia. Tons in the spring, even more in the fall. And our light is having an impact on them as they try to work their way safely over our state. So one thing that's important, and this has to do with collisions, building cause mortality. So it's not just lighting, but lighting is absolutely part of the equation along with glass. As I'm talking, you're thinking, I'm sure, of high-rise big buildings like I've been showing you. They only make up a very, very small percentage, something like 1 to 2% of all these mortalities, all these bird collisions. Homes are almost 50%, and then low-rise buildings make up the rest. And it's a complicated reason with, again, glass and habitat, but lighting does have an effect. And so the lights of our homes also affect birds. It's not just these big, beams like the 9/11 tribute in lights. Excuse me. And so with all that in mind, one thing that we've done at Georgia Audubon, and we've kind of followed the lead of some other bird groups and Audubon groups across the country, is created a lights out program. And the idea is real simple. How can we reduce lighting during migration specifically to try to reduce that pull into homes or away from downtowns to make it so our birds can safely migrate overhead? So we focus on the migration periods, spring and fall, March through May, and then again mid-August into mid-November. So we're right now at the beginning of it. And it's a voluntary pledge. We have a homeowner pledge and a commercial pledge trying to get buildings to reduce their lighting. Excuse me again. And so far we've focused our efforts on Atlanta, again, just because of who we were as an organization, but we are expanding statewide. So we, if you happen to manage any big buildings, we would love for you to consider signing on. This is an example of Chicago, where they have focused on the high-rise buildings in their city and getting them to reduce the top kind of decorative light of the big buildings. And you can see there's still a glow there, but it is lessened quite a bit. Another cool thing that we're working on right now at Georgia Audubon and some other groups across the country have done is with that radar technology and historical data and understanding wind patterns, we can actually predict big movements of birds over an area. And so if you as a homeowner or you as a building manager are unwilling to turn off your lights for a few months in the spring or a few months in the fall, we're hoping that if we give you a forecast and say, hey, the next 3 days are going to be really heavy with birds, please turn out your lights for just these couple of days, it can really have an impact. And so we're working on a statewide education tool that will alert our members and anyone we can broadcast it to that please consider reducing your lights during these next few nights. So that's what the lights out alerts will be once we get those up and running. Now, thinking about the biology of some of these birds, kind of stepping back, there's some really cool stuff that you might not know much about with birds. One thing that's really neat is it's been shown that some birds will call, they'll vocalize more frequently as they fly over an illuminated area. Are they doing so because they're confused or attracted? Who knows? It's probably something that's deeply embedded in them and their flock formation. But the problem is because there is a connection with flock formation and flocking of the species in their calls, those that call more at night tend to collide more with buildings, because if you have a bluebird and it's calling saying, I'm anthropomorphizing here, hey friends, let's go this way, something's going on here, they're pulling their species mates in with them, making it more likely to collide, where those that don't make calls tend to not collide as much. And so we've seen that in our data in Atlanta, where those birds that are known to not collide, like this blue-gray gnatcatcher, we find very few. And thrushes, which do call, we get a bunch of them. So just an interesting way that life history and behavior factors into lighting. Another way, with many of us joining from the coast today, seabirds can really struggle with light. They can collide with structures, whether it be buildings or electrification or electrical lines or lighthouses. But they also have issues landing where they shouldn't because of bright lights. And a lot of these birds aren't meant to perch on the land, so they can actually struggle to take off, which is a problem. They can be more likely to be hit by vehicles or even predated upon as they just sit helpless on the ground. And so a lot of these birds don't breed in Georgia, but they do visit our waters during the winter months. So it's something interesting to think about. And a lot of this, I've been talking about collisions, because lighting and collisions really go hand in hand. But there are many other ways that lighting is affecting our non-migratory species. It's disrupting their circadian rhythm or their daily cycles. I live in an apartment complex in Atlanta. I have birds singing super late at night and really early in the morning. And a lot of the data is still out on that, but we do know it's affecting their energy usage, It might be affecting their nesting and their mate choice. And we do see some seasonal effects as well, where birds will start to enter their reproductive stage. Their hormones will ramp up because that's oftentimes connected to the amount of light during the day. And so there are other ways that lighting is affecting the behavior and reproduction of our birds as well. So hopefully I showed you lights and birds. It's complicated and it's often not very good. So what can you do about it at home? First, please consider taking out our Lights Out pledge. Solely a voluntary effort. What we want you to do is, be smart about your lighting. Use down shielded light, which is what you're seeing here. There's no reason for your beams to go up to the sky. If you have to have lights on, keep it down. Use motion sensors or use timers. If you feel unsafe and you don't want all your lights off, have that garage light, again, on a timer or on a motion detector. And then again, turn off whatever you can during those months. It'll save you money, it'll save you energy. If you do have an issue with collisions, there are many ways to address your windows, and I'm going to share my contact info in a bit. Feel free to reach out because there are many affordable ways, from old insect screens, the exterior shutters, to all fancy sorts of tapes, and even paints if you want to let your kids or grandkids mess up your windows for a couple weeks during the year. If you're really gung-ho about this and interested, we have a project called Project Safe Flight Georgia, where we are out there monitoring for collisions. Again, this has mainly been a Metro Atlanta project or program so far. I really want to expand it statewide. So if you're anywhere in the state and you're gung-ho about learning about lights or building collisions, please reach out. I would love to share with you the specifics and see if we can open up or start a little hub wherever you might be. So far during that project, the past 5 years, we've found over 2,000 birds of 115 species with a small but dedicated crew of volunteers looking at an incredibly small footprint of Metro Atlanta. So that might not seem like a huge number, but for the small spaces we're looking, we're fighting cleaning crews, we're fighting scavenger animals. It's really indicative, I think, of a larger issue that we have in Atlanta and all across our state. If you're not that gung-ho or you don't want to get out and formally monitor, there is a website called dbird.org. I realize I cut it off here, so please forgive me for that. If you happen to come across a dead or injured bird, you can go to dbird.org, enter your location, put some basic details like if you happen to know what the species is. If you don't, that's great. If you happen to know any more specifics, that's great. If not, the location, and you can upload a photo, and that will allow us to learn more about how many birds are struggling across our state, where, and then informs us on how we can take action to try to reduce those collisions. And if none of that interests you, and you don't want to get out there and look for dead birds, which I understand, it's a thankless job for a volunteer. That 3 Billion Birds paper had 7 simple actions you can take to help birds. One being just drink shade-grown coffee. Drink something that's going to help our birds as they're down in the winter grounds. If you don't know anything about shade-grown coffee, I encourage you to look it up or reach out to me. It just provides habitat for our birds when they're outside of Georgia and down the warmer climates. So hopefully I didn't take up too much time, but here in my overview, I just want to say that light pollution is a real threat to birds, especially our migratory birds as they fly over our developments. And again, it's not just big cities like Atlanta, it's everywhere across our state where there is light pollution. It's mainly a migratory issue, but it is affecting our breeding birds and daily rhythms of a lot of our species. Again, it's not just an urban threat. I really want to push that through because I know it's easy to think of these big cities being the big problems, which they are. But if you think about just our state, there's only one Atlanta, and there's a whole lot of land out there with a whole lot of birds where this could be an issue. And you can help. You can help by reporting birds. You can help by just simply reducing your lights and taking our pledge. You can help by drinking the right coffee or keeping your cat indoors. There are just so many pressures on our native wildlife these days that any little bit can really help. And so again, there's my contact information. Please feel free to send me an email if you have any follow-up questions. I know we're gonna have a Q&A here, but anything further, or if you need resources on how to make your windows safe or why lighting is important or what type of lighting, any of that, feel free to email me at adam.betuel@georgiaaudubon.org. And I will stop sharing to allow Mark to go ahead and take over. So I appreciate your time very much and look forward to the rest of the talk.
Adam, thank you so much. That was really interesting. And I just wanted to let you know that we've put a couple of resources in the chat as Adam was talking that he shared. And we'll also follow up with all of you afterwards and make sure we send those and everyone's contact information as well. But for now, let's turn it over to Mark Dodd. Mark, thanks for being here. And Mark, you're on mute too, so you're just gonna unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, I better switch my screen here. Okay, very good. Well, that was really informative, Adam. I really appreciate all the information on birds and lighting. My name is Mark Dodd, and I'm a wildlife biologist at Georgia DNR, and I want to talk specifically about the effects of artificial lights on sea turtles. So when we talk about sea turtles in Georgia, our primary nesting species is the loggerhead sea turtle, which is a large marine reptile. They're called loggerheads because they have a really large blocky head in relation to other sea turtles. They nest on all our barrier island beaches in May through August. They're listed as federally threatened as a result of declines in nesting from commercial fishery mortality, low reproductive success, and loss of habitat. So the nesting process begins, as I said, in May. Loggerheads nest at night, so they emerge from the ocean. Here's a track of a loggerhead turtle from Cumberland Island. They emerge from the ocean at night, make their way up the beach, usually up to the dunes, select a spot that seems suitable, and deposit about 115 eggs on average. And so turtles generally nest between the high tide line here and the apex of the primary dune, occasionally actually behind the primary dune. So the eggs incubate in the nest for about 60 days, about 2 months. The hatchlings or the eggs hatch. Hatchlings make their way toward the surface. Their primary cue to emerge is temperature. So if the sand temperature is too hot, they just sort of hang out and wait until it cools down. Then when it cools down enough, they emerge, which ensures that they primarily are emerging at night as well. And they make their way to the ocean. And so here's a picture of a standard nest. This is the nest position is right here under this plastic screen that we put down to protect the eggs during incubation from predation. And you can see a couple little depressions here where the hatchlings have emerged. And if you look here, hopefully you can see all these faint little pathways down to the beach. These are hatchlings that have made their way down to the ocean from the previous night. And you can see they're all leaving the nest and going straight to the water. So that's what we like to see. When the hatchlings do emerge, they tend to move pretty quickly. That's for good reason. When you're a small silver dollar size hatchling, there's a lot of things that can eat you on the beach. And so the consequences of taking your time and not getting straight to the water are pretty severe, often death at the hands of a predator. So loggerheads, they evolved nesting on beaches with no artificial light for millions of years. And so they've developed a pretty effective mechanism for hatchlings to find the ocean. The primary cue they use is hatchlings simply go to the brightest point on the horizon. There are some secondary cues. It's been shown experimentally that they move away from dark silhouettes on the beach at night, like a dark tree line like you see here. Also, beach slope has an effect. If there's two horizons and one of them is a little bit higher elevation than the other, they're going to go toward the lower elevation horizon. But these secondary cues are really only used when there is no light at all and there's no chance of using that method to get to the beach. And so on a dark, undeveloped beach with no artificial lighting, the ocean is almost always the brightest point on the horizon. Even on a moonless, overcast night, the ocean is slightly brighter to a hatchling than the landward side of the beach with the dunes and the dark tree line. So artificial lights are really problematic for turtles because when you have artificial lighting on the beach, like in this photo here, it becomes the lightest point on the horizon. So of course, hatchlings become disoriented when they emerge from the nest. They end up going to people's houses. They end up in garages, swimming pools, and unfortunately on the road. So this is just an example of a hatch that went poorly on Tybee Island in Georgia, where the hatchlings emerged, made their way down Highway 80 toward this yogurt place, and were run over by cars at night. So certainly artificial lights have a direct effect on turtle hatching and orientation. In addition, I think most people are familiar with this scenario where you have direct illumination of the beach and have heard about hatchlings being misoriented, but now we're starting to see this scenario where the lights from a distant light source, maybe not directly on the beach, are creating sky glow like you see here, which results in both lethal and sublethal effects with sea turtles. So on the right here, this photo just shows a standard hatch on Ossabaw Island, and the nest is right over here, and so these hatchlings should be going straight toward the ocean, but instead they're following the sky glow near Savannah and running down the beach. And some of these animals are going to end up in the dunes where they die from exposure or they're eaten by predators. Some of these hatchlings will eventually make their way back to the water 400 or 500 meters down the beach. So there's both lethal and sublethal effects. Certainly when they're instead of going straight, when they're not going straight to the water, they're subject to predation over a longer period. And hatchlings have a very limited amount of energy that they emerge from the nest with to get themselves offshore into the habitat, into the sargassum weedline habitat. And if they waste a bunch of it on the beach, then they're less likely to have enough energy to get into that habitat and ultimately survive. So it reduces their fitness. Now there's definitely some coastal structures that are particularly problematic for creating sky glow. Those include bridges and port facilities. This is the bridge in Savannah, the Talmadge Bridge, and behind it you can see the Ports Authority site. And particularly these bridges, like the Talmadge Bridge here in Brunswick, near where our office is, the Sidney Lanier Bridge, which is another large semi-suspension bridge. They're actually above the horizon. And so when you light up those structures, it's something that's really easily seen from the beach, even at a distance of up to 17 to 20 kilometers. And when we have low clouds, the light from those structures reflect off of the lights and cause sky glow. So currently, well, as of last year in 2020, about 4% of Georgia's loggerhead nests had misoriented hatchlings. And so that's really that's a pretty good number. It's certainly not as high as some places in Florida where there's a lot of artificial light on the beach. We're lucky in Georgia because we have 13 barrier islands, and most of those are protected. They're in conservation ownership with no artificial light on the beach. But our developed beaches, certainly, which include Jekyll, St. Simon's Sea Island, and Tybee, have a significant amount of light on the beach that can affect turtles. So this figure on the right here just shows the locations of the misorientations from last year on the Georgia coast. And it's sort of what you would expect on these islands like Cumberland and Little Cumberland with no artificial light. There's just a few sort of random misorientations. The developed beaches, Sea Island, Jekyll Island, have a fair number of misorientations. We have a cluster of misorientations on Little St. Simon's, which is not a developed beach, but we have a low dune field here on the north end, which makes them susceptible to light sky glow from the Brunswick area. As we move up the coast, there's some random misorientations, but we're a little concerned by the number that we see on Ossabaw and Wausau, both of which are undeveloped beaches. And we presume most of these misorientations are as a result of sky glow from the nearby city of Savannah. So we're doing pretty well in terms of overall, in terms of the number of nests that have misoriented hatchlings. But a lot of work still needs to be done to reduce these issues on nesting beaches related to artificial light, but also sky glow. So one additional issue with lighting in sea turtles is in regard to nesting females on the beach. So nesting females, it's been shown descriptively nest in lower densities in areas where there's a lot of artificial light. And also experimentally, they've done some colleagues of ours in Florida have done experiments where they monitor a section of beach. Each one of these bars represents a 50-meter section of beach, and the number of loggerhead nests within those sections in Melbourne, Florida. This particular section of beach, it's all dark through this section, and then they just take a mercury vapor light and stick it on the beach over about a 300-meter section here, and you can see that the turtles basically completely avoid, with the exception of one nest here, completely avoid the area that's heavily lit on the beach. And this kind of light pollution we really consider to be a form of habitat loss. It's really no different than putting rock armoring or some other impediment to nesting on the beach, such as a seawall, essentially keeping turtles from accessing the dune habitat that they need to get to deposit their eggs and reproduce. So what can we do about it? Well, the first thing, pretty simply, is just don't build hotels and houses on the beach. Once you do, we almost always have lighting issues. There are some things you can do to mitigate lights from hotels and houses on the beach, but the best thing is don't build them in those locations. So a site like this on Jekyll, where the building is within a couple hundred feet of the dune line where the turtles nest, even if we do everything right on a site like this, we're going to have some issues with lighting and turtles. On the left here is an example of a hotel on Jekyll Island that's sited in a really good position. And so this is the Hampton Inn, and you can see that it's back behind the dunes and then behind a canopy of live oaks here. And so from the beach, all you can see is just vegetation, and no lights are visible from the beach. This is a very high density nesting area for sea turtles, and so you can have development close to the beach if the houses and the hotels are situated properly. So if it's not possible to site the hotels and houses in an area where they won't be easily seen from the beach, then another potential way to reduce the disturbance to sea turtles with artificial lighting is use turtle-friendly lights. And so, interestingly, sea turtles perceive brightness differently than we do as humans. They're much more sensitive to short wavelength light than we are. And this is probably because turtles live in a blue world. All the long wavelength light, the reds and the yellows, are absorbed in the top 3 meters of the ocean. And so their eyes are adapted to be more sensitive to blue light. And so if we look at the visible spectrum, the wavelengths of the visible spectrum from about 350 nanometers to 750 nanometers, which is, again, the visible spectrum. This is what you learned in 5th or 6th grade, the Roy G. Biv: red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, violet. Blue, indigo, violet. Turtles, again, more disturbed by these short wavelengths. And so when you look at an incandescent bulb, for instance, this is the wavelengths emitted from an incandescent bulb and the relative intensities. And you can see that even though an incandescent bulb to us looks maybe white or slightly yellowish, there's still a lot of short wavelength light that's coming through that would be disturbing to turtles. And similarly, you can see with some of these other types of bulbs, like halogen bulbs, a lot of green and blue. Some of the LEDs have a tremendous amount of blue and green, are very disturbing to sea turtles. So luckily, with the development of these LED diodes for lights, they're very energy efficient, but the good thing is it allows you to produce a very narrow range of wavelengths from a specific bulb. And so as an example, these are some wavelengths produced by a particular manufacturer of LED diodes. And they have a they have a type of light with a color of amber. And so it produces light only from about 560 nanometers to about 620 or so. So it's a very narrow range of color, and it actually looks, this is actually one of those lights here that you can see. It looks like an amber color, a little bit yellowish. And so we know that sea turtles, particularly loggerheads, although they see the full visible spectrum, to them, they don't perceive this color as being as bright as the blue and green. And so we can go out on the beach at night. We can use a spectrometer, or we actually have these, some of these, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a filter that we can use and hold it over lights on the beach to see how much blue and green is included, and basically give us a sense of what the level of brightness that a turtle will see looking at that light pattern. So as an example, so this is the Westin Hotel on Jekyll Island, and they work pretty hard to try to make sure that they're using turtle-friendly lighting. And so this looks like a really well-lit, great well-lit place. This is the restaurant and patio here. Certainly plenty of light to sit out at night and eat a meal. And so when we look at this with the filter that basically tells us what the light intensity that a sea turtle sees, this over here on the right is what we actually how a turtle would perceive this light. And you can see that basically all this amber light is not perceived as bright by the turtle. You can see up here there's a bright white. This is actually a rope light decorative rope light that someone just happened to leave on that night by accident, and it shows up here on the filter. And then you see a little bit of blue here from and that's short wavelength light that's coming through this door here. And we could easily take care of that by just putting some kind of a curtain over that door, and we could take care of that. So that's just an example of how turtle-friendly lights can help us mitigate some of the issues with lighting along the beach. Here's another example. This is the Ocean Suites at Jekyll Island, and around the pool here, they were able to get turtle-friendly lighting that actually looks pretty good. But when we look at this scene through the filter, we can see that the front of the building actually is pretty strongly lit, and that's just light coming from the pool itself that's reflecting off the building. So even though they did everything right with the pool lighting here and on the front of the building, there's no lights that are really showing up here, other than, well, actually there's a couple interior lights here, and here. Really, it's just a reflection from the pool. And so they went ahead and installed some turtle-friendly pool lighting, which they weren't thrilled with the color of it, but still that took care of that short wavelength light that was bouncing off the front of the hotel and made it turtle-friendly. So this is a final example, again, of the Westin on Jekyll Island. And what you'll see here is that even when you do everything right on the front of the building, you get all the exterior lights, turtle-friendly and in good shape, you can still have issues with lights that are inside the rooms. You have the short wavelength light from fixtures that are inside the rooms here. And when you look at it through the filter, you can see the bright dots from these fixtures. And the Westin actually is committed to changing out these fixtures and putting in recessed cans. And so we won't get this bright light that will be easily seen by sea turtles and potentially disturb them. So what can you do as someone visiting the beach during the summer to try to reduce the impacts of lights on sea turtles? Well, the first thing is, if you're on the beach at night, I would say We tell people to always use red flashlights on the beach at night. The red color is much less disturbing to sea turtles than short wavelength light. But I would suggest going on the beach without any light. It's interesting how much you can see even with a little bit of a moon, and so there's nothing to fear on the beach at night. So we would suggest going out there without any flashlight. But if you need to use a flashlight, use a red flashlight. We encourage people to always stay in hotels or rent houses that use turtle-friendly lights. That's really helpful. Close the blinds and turn off porch lights at night. Lights out for turtles, just like Adam was talking about with birds, lights out for birds. If you live in a coastal county, do an assessment of the lighting on your property, as Adam suggested, and eliminate any unnecessary lights. And then finally, become involved in local zoning related to lighting. Ask local officials about their lighting plan and whether a lot of the municipal lighting that you see is necessary. Maybe I'm a little bit around the bend on this, but I spend a lot of time looking at lighting, and I can't help myself. I drive around coastal cities and towns, and I look at street lights and other lights that are on buildings, and I wonder, why is that light there, and what purpose is it serving? It's burning all night. No one's even going to ever go past it. It's wasting a lot of money and energy, and you'll find that when you start talking to local officials, oftentimes they don't really have any idea, and maybe someone made a decision to put a light there 20 or 30 years ago, and no one's really thought about it since. And so it's worthwhile to get involved and ask some of those questions. So that's everything I have, Catherine. If we want to.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Actually, let me just share a couple of quick slides as well, just to follow up on what both of y'all said, and then we'll open it up for some more questions. We do have some questions coming in to the Q&A box, so keep those coming. I'm going to share my screen real quick.
Okay. Let me stop sharing here.
No, you're fine. I've got it. And thank you, Mark. That was really great. I think both of you were able to really speak specifically to what the issue is and what the threat is, and concretely what people can do. I just wanted to add a few things that are timely here while we have everyone's attention, and they're probably a little heavier on the sea turtle side. Sorry about that, Adam. Just because I manage our beach on St. Simon's, which is of course a very light, heavy beach. But I wanted those of you, well, everyone really, to think again about the zoning process, like Mark just mentioned. I think all of us on this call probably really enjoy watching birds, and we enjoy going out and doing turtle activities, and that's kind of the fun part. And then the drier, less exciting, less glamorous part of this work is participating in things like county zoning, county or city zoning, depending on where you live. But I'll just tell you, so this is an example of a misorientation event. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my toddler in the background, but a misorientation event we had a couple of years ago on St. Simon's. And, you know, there's things that we can do. Again, Mark drives around addressing these issues, and we can go and talk to homeowners. But, you know, our hands are really tied if we don't have strong regulations at the county level to govern these issues, both what homeowners can do and businesses can do. And so when these zoning updates come about, you know, that's really your time to speak up. Glenn County is in the process still of updating their decades old zoning ordinance that was last updated, you know, more than 30 years ago, in a much different era. And so we really need all of you, whether you come and visit Glenn County or visit or live here, to participate in that process. Or likewise, if you live in a different county, pay attention to when those things are happening, because that's your chance to put your stamp on it and help us, you know, really have the teeth in the zoning ordinance to go in and say, this is what's acceptable and this is what isn't. This, of course, it's not about punishing people. It's about helping them understand what the really easy solutions are when they have a home on the beach or a business on the beach. So I do encourage you to do that and to stay involved and engaged. And then the next slide, just a few other things I wanted to make you aware of. Again, particularly if you do live along the coast, we have some of those turtle-friendly flashlights, and we have posters and table tents and materials that we really encourage our coastal businesses to use for their guests. So if you have a coastal business or a connection to a coastal business, please contact me. We can share those materials free of charge with you, and would really love to get the word out. They're actually about sharing the beach with sea turtles and shorebirds. And it would be really helpful to help us get those out into the community. You know, Mark and Adam both mentioned this, but when you make a trip to the beach or wherever you're staying, it's really an opportunity for you to do a little bit of research and vote with your dollars and decide what it is you want to see. Is it that important to stay on that beachfront hotel, or can you support one that might be a little more, ecologically conscious, that might be inland, and share with the owners what it is that you appreciate about the work that they're doing, or things that you would like to see differently. They really care about you, especially when you're when you're choosing to spend your money there. And then I would encourage everyone to follow as many of these groups as possible, certainly 100 Miles and Georgia Audubon and Georgia DNR Wildlife Resources. Also groups like the St. Simons Island Sea Turtle Project, or the Tybee Sea Turtle Project, or the Georgia Shorebird Alliance. There's lots of different groups, and the more you can follow and share and like things on social media, that really helps us, get the word out to even more folks. In terms of the zoning process specifically, I would encourage all of you to go to our website and sign up for our action alerts. We're going to have lots of things happening over the summer, specifically around lighting, where again, we really need you to step up and speak up as much as you can. And then finally, I think everyone on this call is doing this one, but educate yourself, lead by example, share what you've learned tonight with a friend or two, and and why it's important to you. And of course, you can always don't advocate for destruction of property like this turtle here. We've had some volunteers over the years who followed that model, but certainly try to do the right thing as much as possible. Oops, let me back up. So let me go. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And we've gotten a bunch of questions actually. So Mark and Adam, if you have a few minutes, we will try to get through a couple of these. There's some really great questions. So we'll try to get to a couple of them at once. I guess the first one is, what should we do if we find an injured bird or sea turtle? What would be, sometimes you have a bird that might be stunned, or a sea turtle that you find on the beach. What are the best strategies? As citizens, if they're not on a permit, what should they do? How should they respond to that?
Go first, Mark, or me, or
go ahead, Adam.
We'll start with Adam.
Yeah, it's tricky. So I do have collection permits, and for my volunteers, what we typically do is pick them up and keep them in a dark, quiet place, and try to, as quickly as possible, get them to a rehabber. That might be difficult depending on where you might be tuning in from, or where local rehabbers are. One thing you want to be especially cautious of, especially if it's a window collision victim, is not scaring it right back into the window it just hit, which is problematic because often they're just sitting a few feet away from the window. So yeah, the main thing we do is try to keep it somewhere quiet and quiet as long as possible, and then get it to a rehabber, because oftentimes even if the external injuries are not apparent, they are struggling from more or less a severe concussion at minimum. So it's kind of a generic answer, but that's what I would do.
Right. And so for sea turtles, if you do find an injured sea turtle, whether it's a hatchling or a larger animal on the beach, you can just call we have a 1-800 number, 1-800-2-SAVE-ME, and that will let us know, and we'll make arrangements to respond and take care of that animal. So it'll either be released depending on the status of the animal, or go to the Georgia Sea Turtle Center for rehabilitation.
Great. Absolutely. That's fantastic. And we'll share some of those resources with everyone. So we've gotten a couple of questions actually. Mark, you talked a lot about different wavelengths of light and how they impacted turtles, and several folks ask, what's happening on the migratory bird angle? Are there different wavelengths that are better For birds, does that matter? And what was the other part of this question? Let's see. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. I'm toggling between a couple of different places. And then are there, bird safe lights like there are turtle safe lights?
Yeah, in general, the less lumens, the better. The less light, of course, is better. But similar to turtles, and I'm definitely not as experienced, it sounds like as Mark is, but that blue rich white light is also not preferable. You want those shorter wavelengths, warmer colors, and the kind of the recommendations from the bird world match those from the American Medical Association, the Dark Skies Association as well. That's better for humans, human health as well. So those kind of warmer colors would be preferable. And then again, less light, or at least directed light. It's good as well, just so it's not impacting the birds as frequently.
Great.
Yeah, and to sort of reinforce what Adam says with sea turtles, although I don't want to give I wasn't able to get into a lot of the details regarding wavelength, but in addition to wavelength, we also are concerned about the total amount of light and the directionality of it, whether it's up in an upward direction, which contributes more to sky glow. A lot of aesthetic lighting is from the ground up, and so that contributes more to sky glow. So even if we use the correct wavelengths, it's not that turtles don't see that. It doesn't look as bright to them. But if there's too much of it, it's still going to be a problem. So even if we use the correct wavelength, we still have to be aware that we could put too much light out there, and the directionality of the light has a big impact as well. So those are the three main things we look at when we're assessing lighting on a nesting beach.
Great. So Adam, I know you chimed in the chats a little bit about Birdcast, I believe, and we'll share that resource with folks. That's the website that shows general movements, and that you're hoping to expand on that later this year. But we've gotten a couple clarifying questions. Can both of you just clarify the time periods that we're talking about that are so important for the respective species to be concerned about lighting?
Sure, I'll go first again. So for birds, again, it's a big issue during migration. And so in Georgia, if we're being very general to try to cover all of it, we do from mid-March until the mid-May, end of May. But the real peak window there is the second half of April into the beginning of May. There's a whole, hundreds of bird species that are migrating over, and some move really early. For example, American woodcock and Louisiana water thrush are already back on territories and breeding, and other birds are still down in the tropics. So that's the broad window in the spring, but that late April, early May is where it really comes through heavy, which is why if we could get the word out fast enough, again, I hope people will commit to a longer commitment of reducing lighting, but if they won't, if they could at least do a few days, we know these, certain dates in spring with the right wind conditions where over 50% of all the birds that are going to migrate over Georgia in the spring are going to do so over 5 to 7 days. So it's not ideal, but if we can at least hit those days, it might be better than nothing. In fall, it's a bit trickier because the hormones are relaxed and birds are a little bit more leisurely in their southbound journey, but we do mid-August into mid-November, again with the peak being late September into October. So there's definitely a peak there, but we have a wide window just to try to catch as much as possible.
And so for sea turtles, it's the time period is May 1st through all the way through the summer through the end of October. We can have hatchlings still emerging from nests all the way till the end of October. So that's the time period for turtles. And Adam hit on one thing which I wanted to add to a little bit, and that is that the American Medical Association put out a white paper. It was 2017, right? Or 16 or 17, basically suggesting that the proliferation of all these new short wavelength LEDs were actually not only harming wildlife, but also bad for human health. And so that's definitely, as we've seen a lot in the past, the wildlife is telling us a story, and ultimately the things that are affecting them are going to affect us and our ability to live on the planet. So it's not just birds, it's human health that's a concern as well.
And we got a question about insects too. Do either of you know anything about light impacts on insect species and maybe the decline specifically of fireflies? Would you say that's related?
Only a little bit, but I am pretty certain I've read at least a little bit of that being a component as well. And, again, I'm mainly coming from the bird perspective, and a lot of, I mentioned that 3 billion birds, for, aerial insectivores, those bug-eating birds that eat them on the wing, swallows and martins and things like that are declining pretty rapidly. So I do believe there is a definite connection there, but I'm not researched enough to act like an authority on it. But I do think.
Yeah, nor am I. I'm definitely not up on the literature on insects and effects on light. Yeah.
Well, I'll put a link here in the comments or in the chat. I think the Dark Sky, International Dark Sky Association is also a really great resource. So again, we could have invited a lot of different experts to talk about human health and wildlife health, but it's certainly across the board a big issue, but you can learn more in that chat box. I just want to get to a couple more questions if you have patience with me, because we got a lot of good ones. Let's see, I just wanted to hear from, we've gotten a couple of questions about the golden ray and whether there's, for those of you who don't know, that's an overturned ship near St. Simon's that has been being slowly cut up over the past couple of years now. And any insight as to whether they will be cutting up the golden ray overnight during loggerhead nesting season, and how would that affect nesting or hatching sea turtles?
So they will be during the nesting season. They're not going to have it removed by the time May 1st rolls around. Obviously, it's a unique situation. Normally, we'd be concerned about that much light. And one thing that we're lucky in regard to the golden ray, because it sits in a location in St. Simon Sound where we don't have a lot of nesting in that area. There's a little bit of nesting on the north end of Jekyll Island, north of the Boneyard, and there's a little bit of nesting around the corner of St. Simon's, but most of the nesting on those two islands is around on the Ocean Beach side. So there may be some effect. We obviously don't expect that to restrict females coming up on the beach, but potentially it could be a problem for nesting or for hatchlings emerging ultimately. So luckily we're not going to have a lot of nests that are involved, and we really do want to get that ship out of there. So we're going to have to put up with a little more light probably over the short term than we would normally like to see out there.
So a couple of questions, I think in different capacities. We had some who might be on the AmeriCorps team this year, as well as some citizens. Just curious, if they notice bright lights that appear to be, hazards on the beach specifically. Is there someone that they should call? Can you talk a little bit about the process we use to monitor those, Mark?
Sure, yeah. Well, they would just call us at the Department of Natural Resources. They can get in touch with us, and we'll look at those. It's important to realize that on the Georgia coast, there's no statewide lighting regulation. So each of the local municipalities have different lighting ordinances. And as you talked about earlier, some of those haven't been changed since like Glenn County, for instance, the lighting ordinance that applies to St. Simon's and Sea Island hasn't been changed since the early 80s. Jekyll Island has the most comprehensive lighting regulation. And so because each one of them has different, different aspects, it's best just to call us, and then we'll investigate and do a survey and see whether the lights are in compliance or not, and try to get a change made.
Excellent. Yeah. And it's a slow process. And just to go back to the zoning ordinance, just to reiterate how important that is, there are, regulations in there. It's not just about beaches and sea turtles, but it's about neighborhoods inland, again, that contribute to sky glow, but that would also impact, human health and human just in quality of life. So stay tuned for more information specifically to Glenn County, but wherever you're tuning in from, we do encourage you to participate in that. And then I just got a little bleak question that I guess we'll end with. I'd like to hear from both of you. And it just says, is there any hope? So I guess, kind of with all of this in mind, how we're developing our coast in certain places, certainly inland at least, and on some of the islands, are we on a trajectory where we can still make these impacts, and then certainly statewide as well? I hope the answer is yes, but
Yeah, I hope so. So I think there are a few positive things, at least from the bird world. So that really scary paper that I keep referencing, it's 3 billion birds. Actually, a nice website, 3billionbirds.org, I think.
Ooh.
A whole lot of bird loss was mentioned there, but there were areas of gains, and they're where we've actually put in the effort and the money. You know, raptors have rebounded from banning DDT. Many of the coastal birds you're familiar with, you know, peregrine falcons and bald eagles, which have rebounded amazingly in our state, brown pelicans, and then waterfowl, where we've protected wetlands. I mean, so the good thing from that paper was like, if we actually put in the effort, we can do it. Regarding collisions specifically, and one thing that Mark mentioned about lighting ordinances, and we haven't done anything yet at Georgia Audubon about this. It's something that we're working towards now, but there are more and more ordinances, at least in regards to bird-friendly buildings. And because of these ordinances, there are more and more products that are becoming cheaper and cheaper to use. You know, we love glass right now in our country. To use glass that can kind of meet our aesthetic preferences, but also be safe for birds. There's LEED building code or LEED certification that has lighting and bird-friendly glass embedded in it. So it does seem to be, looking at this particular issue facing birds, there are some, you know, some hopeful things coming out. And New York City just passed the most aggressive bird-friendly building legislation in late 2019 and early 2020. So my hope is that if they can do it, we can do it in Atlanta or somewhere else here in Georgia. So I sure hope so. I'm working hard, assuming there's some positives there.
Yeah, I guess from the turtle side, it does seem bleak sometimes. There seems to be so many threats coming from all directions, but there's definitely some hope. And a really good example is sea turtle conservation in Georgia. I think if you look back, we first recognized that loggerhead specifically were in trouble over 50 years ago. And the problem is the species isn't sexually mature till they're 30 or 35 years old. And so it's over the last 50 years, we've put a lot of time and energy into a lot of different conservation initiatives to recover the species. And we know from some population modeling we've done recently that we came very close to losing them in Georgia in the early 2000s. But they've responded to some of our management. We're asking a lot of partners to modify what they do and how they live to accommodate loggerhead turtles. And we've seen some improvement. We're not out of the woods yet. We have a lot of work to do. We have to remain vigilant. But certainly there's some room for hope there.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true, especially here in Georgia. We have a long and proud history of conservation, right, for all of these animals that we care about and for all of our landscapes. And so I think it's all up to all of us, you know, to carry that torch forward and not let our ancestors down and those who have kind of come before us in recent years to keep that moving forward for birds, for sea turtles, for everything that we care about. So Adam, Mark, thank you both so much. This was fantastic. I learned a lot, and I know everybody on the call did. Just to let everyone know, we're going to follow up with you afterwards. So we'll share a lot of these resources that we talked about tonight, but just really want to thank both Mark and Adam for their time and generosity in being here with us tonight. And all of you for spending your evening with us too, to learn more about lights and its impacts on wildlife. I'm going to go ahead and just share a closing slide and we'll share those resources. But again, from 100 Miles standpoint, we'd love for you to stay involved with us. So please follow us on social media, visit us on our website. Again, we'll be following up and we hope you join us for another program soon. So thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a great night and hopefully we'll see you on another program and lights out. Don't forget to turn out your lights. Take care.